The galaxy had known peace for as long as any civilization could remember. The Galactic Treaty was an ancient document signed millennia ago that prohibited all forms of armed conflict between the hundreds of species that shared the stars. War in the eyes of the galaxy was a relic of a primitive past, something that had long been abandoned in favor of diplomacy, trade, and cooperation. Yet among the thousands of races that inhabited the galaxy, there was one noticeable absence from this grand peace agreement. Humans. Noon talked openly about why humanity had never been offered a place at the tables. Some said that humans were too inexperienced in galactic matters, while others whispered that they had been purposely excluded, left in the shadows, because they were seen as too dangerous. Still, their exclusion was accepted without question, like an unspoken rule that Noon dared break. Humanity existed in the background, tucked away on the fringes of the galaxy, ignored but never forgotten. The Galactic Council, made up of the most advanced civilizations, oversaw everything. Their purpose was to ensure that peace continue. That no species ever strayed too far into the dangerous path of militarization. Every few cycles, the Council would review the status of lesser-known species, determining whether they could be integrated into the broader community. But humans, they were never on the list. Rumors swirled among the younger races. Some believed that humans were a backward species, still too primitive to join such an enlightened galaxy. Others thought that humanity had simply not advanced far enough, that their technology and culture were not at the level required to participate in galactic diplomacy. But there were darker, more fearful rumors as well, whispers that suggested humans were capable of things the galaxy wasn't prepared to face. Stories of their violent past, their brutal conflicts, and their unmatched resilience were passed around like ghost stories. Tales of a species that thrived in the chaos of war. Other than shying away from it, it was against this
backdrop that diplomatic mission was dispatched to Earth. The Galactic Council had sent an emissary, a representative from one of the most peaceful races in the galaxy, tasked with observing humanity and determining whether their exclusion from the treaty was still justified. The mission was simple: observe, gather data, and report back. If humanity had evolved past their warlike tendencies, perhaps they could be reconsidered for inclusion. If not, well, the galaxy would continue to watch from afar, always worry. The diplomat arrived in Earth's orbit, unnoticed, hidden by the advanced cloaking technology of their ship. From this vantage point, they could observe the planet without fear of detection at first glance. Earth was much like any other inhabited world, a blue-green sphere teeming with life, with vast cities spayed across its surface, but something about it felt different. There was an intensity to it akin to raw energy that pulsed from every corner of the planet. The diplomat began their observations, using the ship's sensors to scan the planet's surface and its inhabitants. What they found was unexpected: humanity. It seemed it was not as primitive as some had assumed. They had technology, industry, and culture that rivaled many of the more advanced species in the galaxy. They had built towering cities, created intricate machines, and developed a complex global society. But what stood out the most wasn't their advancements, it was their history. As the diplomat delved into the records of human history, they uncovered a story that was unlike anything they had ever encountered. War, it seemed, was not just a part of human history, it was woven into the very fabric of their existence. From earliest records, humans fought. They fought for territory, for resources, for power, for survival. And yet, no matter how many wars they fought, no matter how many times they nearly destroyed themselves, they always emerged stronger, more resilient. The diplomat reviewed footage of Earth's greatest conflicts, the World Wars, civil wars, revolutions, and even skirmishes that took place beyond their own planet, in the far reaches of their solar system. What was most striking wasn't the destruction or the chaos, it was the aftermath. Every time humanity seemed on the brink of collapse, they adapted, they innovated. It was as if conflict was not a hindrance to their progress, but a catalyst for it. This realization unsettled the diplomat and Galactic Council's view. War was something to be avoided at all costs. It was destructive, wasteful, and ultimately unnecessary, but for humanity, conflict seemed to be a part of their evolution. They didn't just survive wars, they grew from them, and yet despite their long history of violence, the humans on Earth today were not at war. They were living in relative peace, cooperating on a global scale in ways that would have been unimaginable just a few centuries earlier. The diplomat was conflicted. Humanity's capacity for war was undeniable, but so was their capacity for peace. They had developed technologies that could heal the sick, feed the hungry, and connect the farthest corners of their planet. In an instant, their culture was rich with art, music, and ideas that inspired not just their own kind but anyone who could witness it. There was a beauty to their chaos, a strength in their contradictions. As the diplomat continued their observations, they began to understand why humanity had been excluded from the Galactic Treaty. It wasn't because they were too primitive or too violent, it was because they were something else, entirely something. the galaxy had never encountered before. Humans were not a species that could be easily categorized or controlled. They were unpredictable, capable of both great destruction and immense creation, and that made them both dangerous and extraordinary. The diplomat knew that a report to the Galactic Council would be difficult. How could they explain what they had seen? How could they describe a species that thrived in the very thing the galaxy feared most? The diplomat continued their silent observation of humanity, digging deeper into their complex history. What they had learned so far had already challenged many assumptions. Now they sought to uncover the deeper intricacies of this species that the galaxy had chosen to ignore. They began to focus on the darker moments in human history, the ones filled with destruction, suffering, and relentless conflict. But even in these moments, humanity displayed something unique: an ability to endure. As the diplomat sifted through the archives, one truth became increasingly clear. War was not an anomaly in human history. It was a constant. From the earliest tribal skirmishes to the advanced space-age conflicts, humans had engaged in warfare time and time again. Civilizations rose and fell based on the outcome of battles, yet somehow humans never seemed to learn the same lesson that the Galactic Council had enforced for millennia. They didn't avoid war, they adapted to it. Humanity's conflicts, spanning thousands of years, were not merely fights over land or resources. They were ideological, cultural, and sometimes seemingly inexplicable. Wars had been fought over religion, over politics, over nothing more than pride. And yet, there was something remarkable about how each conflict shaped the species with each war. Humans didn't just recover, they innovated after every major conflict. Their technology advanced, their societal structures became more complex, and their understanding of themselves deepened. The diplomat watched in awe the history of human warfare. Unfolded the First World War, a catastrophic global conflict, was followed by remarkable leaps in science, technology, and medicine. The Second World War, then more devastating, led to the creation of institutions designed to maintain peace, a global acknowledgement that cooperation was not only necessary but essential for survival. And even beyond the wars that ravaged the 20th and 21st centuries, humanity had developed weapons and technology that had the potential to end all life on Earth if they hadn't used them. This restraint was baffling to the diplomat. The very weapons that could reduce entire continents to ash had remained dormant for decades. Humanity, despite its history of violence, had somehow learned to live under the constant threat of destruction without succumbing to it. They had developed the means to annihilate themselves, and yet they chose not to. It was a paradox that defied logic. And then there was the matter of how humans treated one another during times of peace. Thought they fought war. They also built societies that valued empathy, cooperation, and creativity. They invested in technologies that allowed them to communicate instantly across vast distances, share knowledge, and improve the lives of others. They created art that expressed their deepest emotions, their hopes, and their fears. They explored the stars not just to conquer but to understand the universe around them. The diplomat found themselves becoming more and more intrigued by humanity's resilience. This was a species that didn't break under pressure. Instead, they grew stronger. Every conflict, every hardship seemed to fuel their drive to survive, to innovate, to push beyond their limits. It was as if conflict, instead of destroying them, refined them. While other species had crumbled in the face of war, humans had used it as a stepping stone to something greater. In their studies, the diplomat uncovered a curious aspect of human culture that further added to the mystery. Despite their capacity for violence, humans also had an extraordinary capacity for compassion. In the aftermath of their greatest wars, they had rebuilt not just their cities, but their relationships. They helped one another, formed alliances, and shared resources in ways that were in many cases unprecedented in the galaxy. After the devastating World War, humans established humanitarian organizations dedicated to the relief of suffering. They invested in peacekeeping forces, developed international treaties, and worked toward global cooperation actions that seemed to contradict their warlike nature. Even more perplexing was their ability to forgive, to rebuild relationships with former enemies. Nations that had once sought to destroy each other became allies, working side by side to ensure that such conflicts would never happen again. This, the diplomat realized, was humanity's greatest strength: the ability to evolve from conflict, to learn from their mistakes, and to move forward, not as fragmented survivors but as unified species. It wasn't they sought war, but when it came, they emerged from a transformed, more resilient, and more determined to create a better future. But there was still an underlying tension within human society. Despite their progress, despite their peacekeeping efforts, the diplomat could sense that conflict was never far from the surface. Humanity had learned to keep war at bay, but they hadn't eradicated the potential for it. Their history, full of brutal conflicts and hard-earned peace, suggested that war would always remain a part of their existence. What fascinated the diplomat most was the humans' approach to this potential for conflict. Instead of pretending it didn't exist, they prepared for it. Their military forces remained powerful, their technological advances and weaponry were unparalleled, and they wielded this power with caution. It was as if they understood better than any other species the true cost of war. He had learned, perhaps the hard way, that unchecked aggression led to ruin, and so they kept their weapons ready, but unused, their soldiers strained but not deployed. The diplomat was beginning to see why the Galactic Council had been so cautious about humanity. This species was unpredictable. They were capable of immense violence but also incredible restraint. They could build weapons that could destroy planets, yet they used that same technolo. Guido explore the stars and solve complex global problems. They were both the most dangerous and the most disciplined species the diplomat had ever encountered. In the quiet moments of their observation, the diplomat Matt couldn't help but wonder what would happen if humanity were to be brought into the galactic fold. Would they bring their capacity for conflict with him, introducing war into a galaxy that had long since outlawed it, or would they use their unique understanding of conflict to help the galaxy avoid the very thing that had shaped the mana? Thing was humanity was not like any other species. They had evolved not just in spite of conflict, but because of it. They were a species forged in the fires of war, yet tempered by the desire for peace. The diplomat understood